Hello and good day to you all. This is another episode of the TRC podcast. I am your host, Jake. Along with me are my friends and colleagues, Adam and Ryan. Uh, Sorry last week for the somewhat jumbled transmission we had. It was a chaotic time with both Alex and Merb being away. We should have Merv back for next month, and then Alex maybe as a guest at some other point. But we're still in the learning process of doing this right now and learning how to do this as a three-man operation. So please bear with us with any more difficulties we may have. That being said, let's get into the racing. First order of business, of course, was the Cup race that we had at Loudon yesterday. A very good race. That was one of the better ones that we've probably had in Loudon history, and definitely the best race that we've had on a flat or oval track this year. So, what say you guys?
I thought it was really good. There was definitely a bit of a concern about whether how easy it would be to pass. And I thought that was maybe we saw a lot of passing on restarts, and then we would see maybe 10, 20 laps into runs it would get a little harder. But then we also saw tires would start to fall off, and I thought that made all the difference between this race and races like Gateway or Phoenix or Richmond, especially Martinsville. So I thought, that really created a lot of opportunities for comers and goers and guys who had better long run cars than short run cars. Then especially later in the race when you had those alternate strategies between guys who'd stayed out, guys who'd taken 2 tires, 4 tires, that really threw a wrench into everything. I mean, we saw Truex dominate before going off sequence, taking only 2 tires, and then it was Chase and Christopher Bell at the end. So they had a really nice battle between them and Kurt Busch and Logano, who'd stayed out. So that was really good stuff.
Yeah, I was a little apprehensive about this race because, as you said, the flat tracks have pretty much sucked this year. And over the first 30 or 40 laps of this race, I didn't see a whole lot of passing, and it looked like track position was going to be everything. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go again. But turns out that Goodyear really brought a good tire for Loudon, and we had more tire fall off than I've ever seen at that track. And that really contributed to comers and goers and different setups being advantageous at different parts of the run. And I really enjoyed the race. I also really was happy to see it end on a long green flag run. I think the last run was 92 laps, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a nice change from the constant green white checker finishes that we've had this year. And it was a very fair and just running order at the end. We didn't have anybody back into a good finish. And yeah, it was a pretty damn good race. And I am at the point where I actually look forward to Loudon every year, which is not something that I would have said even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I thought the run at the end was. I mean, there was part of me that was glad to have it finished without any real bullshit. But then also, I thought, I kind of was. Part of me was kind of hoping it would turn into a fuel mileage thing because we haven't really had one of those races since. Okay, well, there was the one Pocono race last year, but it seems like we only get like one of those once every 2 or 3 years at this point, and it's kind of like, it's a bit of a it can be a bit random, but I think there's absolutely a driver's skill involved in saving fuel, and so I don't know. I was kind of hoping at least a few guys who'd pitted under that last caution would run out. I guess Austin Dillon was the only one who did, other than Logano and Kurt and Custer, who I tweeted this from the podcast account yesterday. He just continues to have this completely inexplicable season where every single race, it's like he ends up with a beyond putrid pass differential, but like a lot of that is because he makes extra pit stops under green that he shouldn't be having to make, or the pit crew just screws up under green. And yesterday it was both, and he ended up with a minus 37 when it should have been maybe a minus 15 or so, and it completely just another race that he had a really good run going late in the race, and just it ends up being all for naught, and it's just completely defying analytics the way his season has gone.
Yeah, it's pretty wild how almost every one of his issues this year has happened under green.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, and especially in a year where we've had so many cautions and so many pit road issues under caution, where it's like, most of the time, like for example, Tyler Reddick in this race, he kept having pit issues, although I'm not sure what because the broadcast never mentioned it, but he kept losing spots in pit road and then kept having to drive back through the field, and he had the best pass differential in the race, and it was all honest. Whereas Custer, he's fine under caution stops, but it seems like shit always happens to him, under green,
Yeah.
or he has a flat tire or whatever, and it's just ridiculous.
I guess the ultimate example of that goes back to the Bristol dirt race where he wins the pole, and then like in the first 5 laps of the race has this overheating issue, has to come in under green, gets passed by the whole field, which ends up counting against his pass differential. And then I think he fought his way back to like 12th or 13th, but still ended up with a really bad pass differential in that race. So it's just, you think something like this just has to, you have to see some positive regression at some point, but it's like just completely defying all logic at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I do think this will regress as the season goes on. Granted, I've been saying that for 2 months now, but I do think it has to
Hmm.
it has to end at some point.
Yeah.
Just like the Austin Dillon beating Tyler Reddick streak, it finally ended.
Yeah.
And Almirola's luck streak finally ended. He had a transmission issue and had to go to the garage, and that's the first time the entire year that he's had a problem.
Yep, Almirola and McDowell both had well overdue bad days yesterday, where they, just didn't. Almirola actually was in the top 10 early, but I don't think he had a top 10 car. He was kind of fading already before that.
Yeah, and I think McDowell was legitimately that bad. I mean, his average running position was 27th, and he
Did
finished
get involved in
28th.
that. He did get involved in that Corey LaJoy wreck, but even before
Oh,
that,
that's
he
true.
was lapped. He was lapped on that first run. So yeah, this is what happens to these guys when we get races on normal tracks where they, they don't turn into really huge caution fests. So that was
Yeah,
definitely a breath of fresh air.
for sure. And didn't McDowell wreck his teammate?
I think he did. They never said who spun Todd, but it looked like it was his car. So
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, um,
uh
should we? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to mention though on the positive side, a guy who had a great run yesterday was Bubba Wallace. Probably I would say his best run on a non super speedway of his career, in terms of putting like a full race together, not having any issues, and then getting the finish that he deserved. I think he shut a lot of people up yesterday. I don't want to give this guy too much attention, but there's a certain political commentator on Twitter who always loves to bring him up every single week, and I don't even think this guy watches NASCAR really, because for starters, he thinks one of the tracks is called Coca-Cola Speedway. But this guy, every single week, he has something to say about Bubba, and I checked his account yesterday, not a single word. So, uh, you know, for a guy like Bubba who's always going to be under a microscope for reasons he can't really control, it's always nice to see him have a run like that.
Yeah, I do agree it's probably his best career race. The only other candidate would probably be the 2019 Brickyard 400, where he finished third in a Petty car, which was
Yeah.
pretty damn impressive. But I mean, he's had honestly a handful of runs this year where he could have finished in the top five, but he's always had pit road issues. And today, it does seem like the swap that they did between Bell and Bubba's pit crews seems to be working, because both of them obviously did very well today and didn't have any pit problems. So for their sakes, I
Yeah.
hope that continues.
I not really sure how that's somehow solving both of their pit crews, but I mean, if it's working, then I think it was like only two guys who switched, right? It was like the
Yeah, I think so.
Jackman, who's Joe Gibbs' grandson, and then one other guy. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, Christopher Bell. We'll talk about him a little bit. He earned that. He wasn't the best car all day, but he got up there at the end. He played it. He really came on strong on the last run, and I thought Chase had that once he got up there and passed Logano and passed Kurt. I thought he was just going to drive away, but credit to Bell for really saving his best for when it counted.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I thought Elliott was gonna pull out to a 3 or 4 second lead and just win the race easily. But this Bell's run reminds me so much of Almirola's win last year, in that he kind of hung around in the back
His
half of the
own
top 10, and
his own
then
race last year,
yeah,
he had probably the best car at the end of that race.
yeah, oh, that's true. He did, didn't he? And he finished second, and he might have won had they not shortened it for darkness. So that's true. But it's kind of cool to see a race where it's like a slow burn victory, where you just get better throughout the day and just
Yeah,
work your way to the front naturally without any gimmicks or any bullshit or any attrition. So it kind of was like a classic Jimmy Johnson type win, I would say.
yeah. Kind of
Well,
like
maybe
that.
not.
I don't know. Maybe more like a Carl Edwards type of win,
That's true.
although not in 2008 when he was just dominating every single intermediate. But yeah, I guess what Bell's win does do, though, and I know you said you were going to talk about this, so I'll kind of let you have the floor here for a bit. But the
Okay.
playoffs now, um, we've got now 14 winners, and I would say that this pretty much sets the field because there's now a big gap between 16th and 17th of the guys who haven't won. But if we now get one more winner from outside, or two more winners, we've got guys in the top five in points, Blaney and Truex, who haven't won and could legitimately miss the playoffs.
Yeah, it's I don't think that when they created the system they envisioned this scenario happening, and certainly I didn't think it would ever happen. But I mean, look, I'll be blunt. I think it's bullshit. I think that the playoff system, we've talked about this before. It does not crown the most deserving champion necessarily. It really messes up the points for the top 16. But I think since 2017, when they put in stage points and playoff points, it's been a lot better than it was. But this year is kind of exposing a major flaw in the system. And that's when we get a lot of one off winners who don't do a whole lot the rest of the season, taking the spots of much more deserving drivers. And I mean, I think Austin Cindric, especially after his Daytona 500 win, he's done nothing. Chase Briscoe has done basically nothing outside of 2 or 3 races. I mean, Bowman, I mean, he's still a top 16 driver this year, but he's kind of been invisible for 2 months now. It's just, whereas, I mean, Blaney and Truex, especially Blaney, Blaney's been a legitimate top 3 driver this year. Truex has probably been top 7 driver, and they just haven't had the bounce of the ball go their way in terms of luck, in terms of to win a race and put them in this position. So I guess if we must have 16 drivers in the playoffs, I would like to see them go to a system with top 10 in points are locked in, and then they have 6 wild cards. I think that would be a good balance between consistency and winning. But the only thing we can do is just kind of laugh at the stupidity of the whole thing and do our own metrics on the side to tell the truth. So
Yeah, I was gonna say I think Truex, for one, we've talked about this before, but it seems like James Small is just not good at strategy and keeping up with the track like at all. Like
yeah,
Nashville, Gateway, and now this are all races he probably could have won if not for really, really bad strategy.
and Vegas and Richmond.
Yeah,
Oh
I was
yeah, I
going to
forgot
say
about.
just quickly, and then I'll let you guys continue. One thing I didn't notice anybody talk about yesterday that I was noticing, that I'm surprised they didn't mention, was that about around the 2/3 mark of the race, which was not far off from when we had that restart where Truex and the other guys got caught back in traffic, the sun came out, and I would only assume that the track got a lot warmer after that. But I didn't hear anybody mention it. I mean, that probably was the difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually didn't notice that during the race, but that would make sense too why 4 tires seem to really work well at the end of the race, because the track's hot and slick and has less grip. Then you're gonna need new tires. And what's funny in a tragic way about James Small is that I think the previous 4 races that he screwed up the strategy, he took 4 tires every time when he should not have. And then the one time he should have taken 4 tires, he took 2. And it's like the guy just can't seem to get out of his own way. And I think, in our chat, I've said that I think Truex is actually going to go winless the entire season, and James Small is the reason why. So, he obviously has the speed on certain types of tracks, but that team is reaching Alan Gustafson levels of screwing up strategy. And
I know
it's
it.
I'm neutral on Truex. I don't like him or hate him particularly, but it's hard to watch someone just get sabotaged by bad pit calls over and over and over.
Yeah, I know that all too well. Obviously, I think back to the playoff format though. 16 for starters is just way too many. You just get there's always every single year you get 3 or 4 guys in the playoffs, whether they're just strokers or guys who win who don't do anything else the rest of the year. You always get those guys in who are just they have no chance of getting anywhere. And that's honestly kind of why usually I like when we have winners outside the top 16 because those guys aren't going to do anything. Michael McDowell last year or Austin Dillon in a couple of years when he's won. It's just those guys are just taking up space and they're going to be first round eliminations, but you get those stroker guys, the Ryan Newmans and Almirolas of the world, they get in there and there's a chance that they really fuck things up. Newman could have very well won the title in 2014 with like 40 laps led all season.
Yeah, I just
And then
wanted to quickly
Almirola,
interject. You can continue. Sorry, I said this in the chat the other day, that how ridiculous would Newman winning the title in 2014 have been? Well, remember how bad Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s 2005 was after they made the infamous team swap? that pretty much were chemistry. Well, in that season, Junior had obviously a win that Newman didn't have, but also more top fives than Ryan Newman had in that year, and I think over 100 more laps led in that season. That was a better season and against tougher competition too than what Newman did in 2014. And Newman came within a gnat's ass of winning the championship. That's how ridiculous that was.
Yeah, I mean, I've done the metrics on that Junior 2005 season, and he had some good races in there, but it was awful. He actually, I think he came out behind Michael Waltrip in ETDR. It was pretty bad. But no, and there was actually a Dale Jr. season that Newman 2014 year reminded me of, and that was 2011 when it was like his first season in 2 or 3 years that he was playoff driver, but you look at a little deeper and really the only difference was he was luckier than the last two, and I guess getting Steve Letarte probably was a bit of a help, but that was the fewest laps he'd ever led in his career. I think even worse than the previous two, and
yeah, it was.
Ended up finishing like 7th in points just by totally stroking it, and it was seasons like like Newman in 2014 and then Almirola in 2018 finishing top 5 in points just by finishing 10th every week completely invisibly. That's what this system can do with the way it's designed right now, and that's why I usually really don't like those guys being able to make the playoffs. And Kevin Harvick is kind of who that would be this year, but Blaney and Truex, I mean, they've shown the speed and the consistency to be guys who are legitimate. In Blaney's case, a top 3 driver of the year. ETDR still has him second, but I mean, I do probably think I would take Ross over him in general. And then Truex, he's right now 6th, actually. He's ahead of Kyle Busch now, but I mean, he deserves to be a potential Final 8 type of driver. Actually, his season kind of reminds me of Matt Kenseth in 2014 when he was winless, but he was probably the best of all his teammates and could have won a few races, just didn't get the breaks. And so, yeah, those types of seasons belong in the playoffs, and it's kind of a crime if they don't.
Yeah, and one more thing that's interesting about Truex is that he leads the series in stage wins with 7. So we could have a scenario where the driver with the most stage wins does not make the playoffs, which is pretty ridiculous when you think about it. But I agree with you. Oh, go ahead.
In that case, he has more playoff points right now than guys who have wins.
He does. Yeah, he has more playoff points than Cindric and I think Briscoe.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something else they could do if one of those guys ends up actually missing the playoffs is just have it the top 16 guys in playoff points over the course of the regular season.
Oh yeah, I would be okay with that.
That way, yeah. And then start giving out also, if they do that, start giving out more penalties like they did with Keselowski this year, where they take away playoff points as part of a penalty. So
yeah, I was glad to see they actually did that with Brad because regular season points penalties mean nothing for the most part. So but anyway, like I agree with you, Ryan, that normally I like having these kind of fluky winners from outside the top 16 taking up the back end of the playoffs because it keeps the strokers out. So in past years, I actually would have been happy about Briscoe and Cindric winning, but this year it's just the way it's all unfolded. That's not the case. And granted, like I don't like Blaney does deserve. I mean, Blaney is a legitimate, I think, championship contender. I don't think Truex has had a good enough season to deserve a title. So, in that sense, him missing the playoffs wouldn't be the biggest crime in the world. But,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I would just going to say my stuff about the race, just going back, not to change the subject, but I just wanted to give my take on all of it. A lot to cover here. But first off, to address something Ryan said earlier, the reason why there aren't basically any fuel mileage races are, well, first, it was when NASCAR started throwing, the fake debris cautions more and more when they just got completely out of hand in the early to mid 2010s. And then the stages, which a lot of times the stages, like in this race, are pretty much designed so that that can't really happen, or that there's a much lesser chance of it happening. I think the only notable times that it's happened in the stage era that I can remember, which I'm probably missing a couple here or there, but off the top of my head are the 2017 600 and the Pocono race last year. But it's just not
Daytona 500 too.
Oh yeah. I knew I was
something like the very first stage race of all ever turned into a fuel mileage race, and then we hardly ever saw it. Yeah.
I'm just so bad taste for getting those things. Of course, I didn't see half that race, so I don't have fond memories of it for some personal reasons. But I won't get into that here. But anyways, as far as the race goes, it wasn't as good as the last two races that we had at Loudon, which were borderline, you could say, classics in my opinion, and the best Loudon races ever. But it was still very, very solid. And it had kind of a similar flow to the last two races, where it was kind of active and hot for the first two or three stages. And, you had some incidents and some back and forth and some action. Even if there wasn't much going on for the lead, there was plenty of action behind. After, I guess, 10 or 20 laps into a tire run. And then in the third stage, like the battle for the lead heated up, everything behind it kind of calmed down a little bit, and we didn't have any major incidents after that, which was consistent with what we had the last 2 years. But it was definitely the best race that we've seen at a flatter track this year. I did not have much optimism going into this event. Because of what we've seen on these types of tracks so far this year. Martinsville obviously was abysmal. Richmond was mediocre at best. Phoenix was just okay at best. There wasn't a lot of reason to really, I think, believe that this was going to be a great race. But, I was pleasantly surprised by it. And I think the reason for that is that there was, I mentioned in the chat yesterday, the groove was a lot wider than it was at some of these other tracks. Like, Martinsville was pretty much reduced to one groove because of the temperatures and tire combination. Phoenix did that silly, stupid PJ1 thing that we've talked about, which they were going to do at Loudon. But thankfully, I won't say thankfully because, there's the company that makes these products, they need to make a living. But for the sake of the racing, it was a very good thing that they had a shortage of it, apparently. And so they couldn't do it, just like they couldn't do it last year because of the weather. And that was just fine with me, because I think that's what enabled it to be a good race. And it had that classic Loudon style of action where, you could run on the bottom and take that route where you kind of cut off the track and run on the apron if you wanted to, drive it in deep and make a pass. Or you could roll kind of the middle up near the top and get the run on the outside, which allowed for a lot of action. And again, the tire fall off also was a big factor in it because, like Adam said earlier, the first part of the race, it didn't look like there was going to be much action. But as the tires worn out, we started to see kind of some comers and goers. And it wasn't a ton of passing still, but it was enough to be entertaining. And as I mentioned earlier, there wasn't any battling for the lead in the first two stages. But then a combination of kind of the weather changing and Truex getting stuck back in traffic led to what we saw in the last stage, which was a pretty interesting race for the win. And as far as that goes, I don't really have a whole lot to say about the result. Congrats to Christopher Bell. But I don't, I'm not making fun of him like as a person or anything, but he's about the most uninteresting dude that is a competitive Cup driver that there is. I don't,
Too
like,
much.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I was wanting obviously Chase to win at the end, for Ryan's sake. And so I was a little bit disappointed when Bell passed him and kind of ran away from him. But, that's the way it goes. At least Chase has had, 2 wins recently.
Yeah,
Um,
I've
yeah.
been kind of spoiled lately, so it doesn't hurt that much. And
Yeah.
of course, anytime he wins, you get the whole people just want to somehow downgrade it any way they can and try to play devil's advocate for just the sake of it. So I guess I'm glad that I can avoid that for this week. I guess the big kind of story of the race, though, would be what happened under caution between Austin Dillon and Brad Keselowski. So talk about that for a minute, I guess.
Oh boy. Yeah. So when it happened, obviously none of us knew what triggered it. Nobody knew why Austin swerved into Brad. Nobody, quite knew why Brad reacted the way he did. So it just seemed like two mid-pack drivers acting like idiots. And after the race, Austin Dillon referenced Michigan 2021 when Brad wrecked him at the end of a stage. And it's like, that is the weirdest time to pay somebody back I've ever seen. It's like you wait almost a calendar year and you do it under caution when there's nothing on the line. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, it
And
reminded me of you remember that episode of Seinfeld where George gets zinged by his coworker. I think I think he's when he's still working for the Yankees, and then the guy literally moves to Ohio and starts working for Firestone, and George gets on a plane to fly all the way over there just to give him a comeback. It kind of reminded me of that.
yeah. And it takes a lot to make Brad look like the bigger man, but he really did. I mean, Brad actually sounded quite reasonable in his interview, and he took the high road and he said that he doesn't really care what Austin says about him. Meanwhile, Austin's being a total child about it and saying, he's not going to talk to Brad because blah 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 blah. And yeah,
I have
What I
just
kind of took
I
away
guess
from
go
I
ahead.
thought Dylan's interview where he referenced Michigan, I didn't take that really as that's what that was payback for, but more just of a kind of he's done that type of thing to me too. So I don't know what he was mad at yesterday though. I mean, I guess Brad probably raced him pretty aggressively, maybe got into him or something, and I did think Brad's overreaction was over the top. I mean, just rams him down the whole straightaway, but I mean, neither of them really came out of that looking very good. But yeah, they've been running like 20th every week for a reason, I guess.
Yeah, I have just maybe a slightly different view on it. I mean, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said, but I'm a little bit more sympathetic to Austin in that. Yeah, I don't think it was directly a payback for Michigan. I think it was just kind of like a what do you call it? A result of everything that happened before it, and just kind of a build up. But I I mean, obviously, as we all know, Austin Dillon is not the most high IQ individual, as you can, if you've ever watched part of that reality show that they have on USA, you could see that. But I had a little bit more sympathy for him in that, he did have that really awful incident with Brad last year where, the stage was over and Brad, I know it wasn't intentional, but it was really a moronic move by him that just put him headfirst into the wall at high speed and just caused him to have a half flip. So I can understand why anybody would harbor kind of resentment over that. But, as for what triggered this exactly, I mean, we don't know because, they didn't have cameras watching the race right before that. But when it happened, I mean, yeah, it was kind of a dumb move by Austin Dillon, but it wasn't anything just major, and Brad definitely really overreacted. And I thought that he broke his race car. Like the left side of his car was all the way down on the ground, and he just
That was
ruined it throwing a hissing fit. But somehow they actually fixed it, and the car actually seemed to run better after that. And he ended up having his best run and finish of the season. Amazingly, after that, while I think Austin was, he wasn't running well anyways, and he was just even more done after that.
yeah.
So I don't I don't really have a whole lot to add on that other than I can sympathize with Austin, but at the same time we all know that he's not, shall we say, a profound thinker.
He's kind of like the resident hipster frat boy of the Cup Series, I guess. All those cowboy hats and the reality show, and I mean, I do think he gets a bit too much shit as a driver, just because people think he's only there because of nepotism, and he's had some solid seasons. Past couple of years, really. This season is not one of them, outside of Martinsville and maybe one or two other races.
He is an RCR driver to his core. He is the
Yeah.
most RCR driver that you can possibly get.
Mm-hmm. And congrats to Brad on finally getting his third top 10 finish of the season in 20 races. Um, his season has been, I mean, pretty much however you slice it, a disaster. But I also do kind of think, he's not, either he's not as bad as he looks this year, or the past couple of years he wasn't as good as he still looked. Last year, I think, started to become kind of noticeable that he was dropping off a little bit, that he was way behind Logano and Blaney most weeks. But I also kind of think, and we've talked about this before, but with the Gen 7 car and the going back to full race weekends, this whole infusion of young drivers who now are able to get this equal playing field finally after 2 years of really just being thrown to the wolves. It's really kind of exposed a lot of things, and a lot of drivers have started dropping off more quickly. But I also think, I mean, imagine if Brad were still at Penske this year in the 2 car. I still kind of think he would be running better than Cindric is right now. And so I don't know.
Yeah, I do think he would be running better than Cindric if he was still at Penske. I think he's, like you said, he's not as bad as he looked this year. I think I think some of it is just he's overwhelmed with being an owner. And I think they even mentioned this on the broadcast where it's like, he's got to deal with every level of the organization and he doesn't have that much time to focus on pure driving. So I do kind of understand why he's struggling, but it's still been a disappointment and it's still kind of hilarious considering how egotistical he is and
Oh yeah.
how he was talking about, the next gen requires talent to drive and all that. And he's just falling on his face. So
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, is he's distracted. But once again, he kind of did that to himself. Yeah, just the moral of the story is, I think performance really is so much more about situation and having the right team around you than anybody realizes. I mean, the ultimate counterexample I use for that is Denny Hamlin in 2018 had, by average driver standards, a good season, but by his standards, very disappointing season. And it had kind of been trending downwards for quite a few years. He hadn't really had what I would consider an elite season since before he was injured at Fontana in 2013. He was always the second or third fiddle at Gibbs. And then suddenly he gets Chris Gabehart, and he gets the 2019 package that really rewards good drafting drivers, and suddenly he's this top 5 driver for 3 years. And it's just, if he had started up 23XI that year, driven for them the way Brad is doing right now, who's to say that he would be running any better than 20th? So, yeah, I mean, I will fully admit that him having probably the best situation of any driver the past couple of years, the best crew chief, the best pit crew, the fastest cars usually is probably, one of the top reasons I can't stand the guy. I think he's very overrated the past couple of years. I will, though, say his early career probably doesn't get appreciated enough when he was legitimately just as good as Kyle Busch before he was injured. But yeah, you compare that with something like what's happening with Brad this year or other guys in really bad situations that, Corey LaJoy, Cole Custer, who just can't catch a break, they're not as bad as they look.
Yeah, for my part,
go ahead.
well, yeah, for my part, I've said it before, or maybe I have. I'm not sure, but it's funny because 5 years ago, Brad was easily my most disliked driver in the sport. I could not stand him, and I was really dreading like all the years that were to come because at that point, like in early 2017, he was still elite. Like I remember one guy on RR after like one of his wins saying that Brad is the new boring establishment winner in NASCAR, and like I totally agreed with that. But really, ever since I don't remember
something
who it was.
you would say.
I don't remember who it was, but in any case, since early 2019, he definitely hasn't been an elite driver. Like his 2020, although it was certainly good, it was kind of a consistency bot season that was propped up by a few races where he had, dominant race cars, as well as a couple of just completely bullshit wins. And then last year, he really fell off a lot. Like, not just at road courses where he was just a total embarrassment, but even at the ovals, he was a much lesser driver than he had been before. And then this season, again, how much of it has to do with him, being distracted and driving for the new team and it being potentially worse equipment. We don't know, but, he's even worse performance-wise this season.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just interesting when I think of that, it wasn't that long ago that I used to have hissy fits over this guy. Now, pretty much, we've just got one guy in our server that obsesses over him all the time. And other than that, I don't think anybody even thinks about him other than when something like yesterday happens. He just it's like that episode of a Family Guy at the end where, like talked about, well, it's going to be the same thing every week, and it's all going to get sorted out at the end. So, really, who gives a damn?
Huh. Yeah. I'm kind of not really sure what we should cover at this point. Should we just go into the Xfinity race or the?
Well, I was just going to ask, maybe because we're still only 41 minutes in or 43 minutes in. And if you guys want to talk about more analytics or whatever, we can do that and then go on to Xfinity because we still got a fair amount of time here.
Well, I was kind of trying to put some of that, hold it into things I've been talking about. I guess just kind of a brief rundown. It's still Chase Elliott. Now he is away from Blaney and Chastain, and then it's Larson 4th, Logano 5th, Truex, Kyle Busch, Reddick, Kurt Busch, and then Eric Jones is still somehow in the top 10. I don't even think he's had a top 10 season, but his ETDR number is as high as it is mostly because he is crushing Ty Dillon every week, who showed yesterday that he can't even go 2 laps without just, hooking a hard right and totaling 4 cars.
Yeah, that's something we can talk about in a minute, but I'll let you finish on the analytics stuff.
I do think Jones has had a very underrated season, but I also think my numbers are probably overrating him a little bit. Then outside the top 10, it's Byron in 11th, Hamlin, Bell, Harvick, and Stenhouse is still 15th, which I have explained a couple of times is because of the whole flukish single car team equipment rating thing for the most part. That basically every time he is legitimately good, been very good at passing this year. But yeah, it's like every time he has a race where he runs 25th, it'll automatically come out as his equipment rating is having a 25th place car and overrate how he runs. So, I mean, all in all, though, I think it adds up. It meets the eye pretty well. Not really.
Yeah, I guess. Oh, go ahead.
I was pretty much done.
Okay. I guess just briefly, I would like to talk about Philly season and what's going to happen, especially with uh, Kyle Busch. Speaking of being distracted and running poorly, he seems to have kind of fallen off the face of the earth the last month, and I can't help but wonder if part of that is because of his contract situation and because he doesn't know where he's going to race next year. I mean, if you would have told me a year ago that that Hamlin and Truex could possibly outlast Kyle at JGR, I would have said you're crazy. But I mean, at this point, I'm starting to have doubt that he's going to come back. And what do you guys think? Where do you think he's going to go next year?
I'm still kind of in that I'll believe it when I see it. As far as him leaving Gibbs, I mean, unless Toyota really, for whatever reason, wants him out, I do think Toyota kind of runs the show there. They always push up their guys. Like Bell was one of them, and Eric Jones wasn't, and so it's. But I mean, then again, Kyle has that whole truck team there. That's really their farm system. So if they lose him, he probably switches that team's manufacturer. So it's just I don't see how they can't find some way to keep him, and I just think it's a matter of when and not if. But it would definitely be interesting if he ended up somewhere like Stuart Haas, and he and Harvick were teammates. I think Kyle would probably destroy Harvick at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say for
him.
Yeah. Well, about like a month or so ago, I would have said no. There's no chance that he's leaving Gibbs. Or I would have said a 99% chance that it's not happening. Now I'm more like 60-40. Recently, some of the stuff that's been coming out, even if it's just rumors, has not been pretty for him. Like the M&M sponsorship, losing it was a big deal because they've been one of the most loyal sponsors to NASCAR for a long time. They brought huge recognition and money to the team. And like not being able to get another sponsor that's in that same kind of realm, as we all know these days, is a very bad thing. And if it were somebody that were even slightly less in stature than Kyle Busch, I would have said they definitely would be out because of that. But just because he is a legend and he has been such an established star at Gibb for so long, that kind of buys him more leeway. But yeah, I'm starting to be starting to really question it at this point. I personally hope he stays at Gibbs because I don't want, even if I'm not a Kyle Busch fan or even necessarily just really like him, I want him to be in a good situation where he can compete and contend for wins and championships. I don't want him to have to, kind of slum it in something that he's better than. I don't really know where else he could go. I just cannot see him fitting in at SHR. I mean, I know Tony really doesn't have anything to do with the team anymore, pretty much, but I still can't really see him signing on to having Kyle Busch there. as well as the thing with Kevin and the teammates. Like I can tell you right now, I mean, it may not matter because if Kevin doesn't drive that much longer, I guess it would be fine. But Kevin would definitely not want to have Kyle Busch as a teammate. I think we all known about him long enough to figure on that. And I don't really see what other avenues there could be for him because obviously he's not going to Hendrick or Penske or anywhere like that. And as far as the truck team goes, I think if Toyota or Gibbs, whatever, dropped him, I think he would just stop running the team. I think he would just let the team go at that point because I can't see him. He's been wanting, I think, to drop it for a long time. That would probably be last straw there because he said they've been operating at a big loss for a long time. Their trucks are clearly not as fast this year. Probably the slowest they've been in a long time. So, that's what I think would happen if that were to occur. But I'm still leaning to him staying, but I'm not certain about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know at this point, I guess. We'll just have to kind of see how it unfolds. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, the next thing I was going to bring up on the silly season note that Adam said, which you actually kind of reminded me of when we were finishing up about the Loudon race, is we do know that, yes, Ty Dillon is going to be out of the 42 car at the end of this year. Thank the Lord on that. Which, that in itself, I mean, Ty Dillon, who cares? Probably the worst driver in competitive equipment this year, but it is important and interesting because of the possibility that opens up for 2023. And we've been hearing rumors all about who that might be, like maybe Corey LaJoie, maybe Parker Kligerman, a couple of other guys that are in the mix. What do you guys make of the situation?
I mean,
well, what I've heard is that Noah Gragson might be one of the favorites for the 42, which not sure how I feel about that, considering what just happened a few weeks ago with Noah. He would definitely be an improvement over Ty Dillon, so in that sense, I'd be okay with it. I mean, I would prefer to see LaJoie go to the 42 and maybe send Gragson to the 16. But yeah, I mean, really, I'm happy with anyone other than Ty Dillon is what it comes down to, and I'm also hoping that Eric Almirola does retire and doesn't come back for another retirement tour so he can troll another season. I would like to see Zane Smith get the 10 car if that opens. And what other rides are we forgetting?
I feel like
There's
as far as the non-shit boxes, I'm not sure. Guess JTG Doherty confirmed that Stenhouse is coming back, right? And that they're coming back.
The college thing is always up in the air, like every year.
Yeah. I do hope, mainly for Jake's sake, that Corey LaJoie does end up with either the 16 or the 42, just something better than Spire. I can keep my pipe dream open of Kligerman getting something. It's probably never going to happen, at least in Cup, but full-time truck title contending ride, something like that. I guess I'd be fine with Almirola coming back, only if they can't get anybody better. I'm not sure Zane Smith is quite ready yet, and I'd kind of like to see him have an Xfinity season first. So I guess as compared to like a couple of seasons ago, this feels like maybe not that busy of a silly season, but we'll just see what happens. Gragson, I guess I'll just say, he's going to be in for a rude awakening in Cup when he's there full time. I don't think he's been that good in his college starts this year, and if he drives like he drives in Xfinity, it's he's going to piss off the wrong guy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. As you two have alluded to, yes, as a Corey LaJoie supporter, I would love to see him get the 42, which, even though it's certainly not the best of cars, just anything but this situation he's in right now. I mean, to be honest, I'd be fine with him even just going down to the Xfinity Series, and, if he can just get a decent car there, be competitive. Like, I don't even really care at this point, just anything to get out of this situation that he's in right now. But whether he will get the opportunity or not, I have no idea. I haven't heard any kind of real anything to substantiate like those rumors, ever since I've heard them. But everything I have heard is that, Gragson's on the inside track to either get the 42 or the 16, which, I pretty much, he's about in line with the guys that Colleague have tended to have so far. And he's, like, I would say, a slightly worse driver than Eric Jones. That would be like an improvement over Ty Dillon, because pretty much everything is, but he would just probably be like a 25th place driver there.
Jones is pretty significantly better than Gragson to me. I see him being in Cup like poor man's version of Stenhouse, which is itself, not it. If he somehow is able to stick around for like 8 to 10 years, maybe he eventually becomes a guy who can get the occasional contend for a win, but it's just not. I'm not even positive that he would immediately be better than Ty Dillon, honestly. It's like, at least Ty Dillon, for the most part, seems to keep it in one piece. Yesterday, obviously, was an exception to that, but there would be a lot of torn up sheet metal, I think, with a full Gragson season.
Well, it's not sheet metal anymore. Not to be a Poindexter, but yeah, it's composite now. But we get your meaning. It would, it still would be very costly if that happened. And as far as the other stuff, like, I don't have anything against Eric Almirola, but it's definitely time for him, I think, to step aside and let somebody young and promising come in, and Zane Smith would be, like the obvious choice for that. But, these teams have a funny way of operating, and the manufacturers also have a large say in it. So who knows? I don't know who Ford's golden boy is right now, who the person is that they really want the most. That'll probably ultimately determine it. And of course, at Harvick, Ryan Preece, we still got to think about that. Good Lord, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And then, see, I'm trying to think who else there's one more. Oh yeah, I was gonna say, it's not really news. I don't think it's gonna happen, but like we've kind of been talking on the chat, the possibility of Reddick maybe doing some kind of go-between for 2023. If Richard Childress really decides that he's got it in for him, since he was clearly pissed off at Reddick announcing his move to 23XI when he did, which is stupid, but we all know that Richard Childress is again, he's not the greatest car owners, and he's he doesn't make the best of decisions a lot of times. But as far as that goes, I don't really know or foresee anything that Reddick can do in the interim period if RCR does decide they want to sabotage.
Yeah, I don't see Reddick going anywhere next year unless for whatever reason he decides to pull a Casey Kane and just quit on them, like in the middle of the season, in the middle of a race, but I don't even know what would be open for him if he did something like that. So I think Kane, when he already had the Red Bull thing lined up for 2011, when I guess it was that Charlotte race where he just quit in the middle of the race, and then
Yeah, because the RPM didn't. They literally gave him a car without brakes, if I remember correctly.
remember that. Yeah, I mean, I just don't see Reddick being the type of guy who would, risk not having, if he has a contract for next year, I don't see any reason why he would um, try to get out of it and risk possibly having to drive something much worse. So,
We discussed the possibility of him being maybe bought out by 23XI, but I don't think that's going to happen.
they're not going to go to 3 cars for next year, and they have Bubba and Kurt both, I think, under contract. So I was kind of going to try to move the discussion, though, now towards, I guess we could briefly touch on Xfinity and then just go into picks for next week. There's really not a whole lot else to talk about unless you guys have ideas.
No, I think that's it. It's all right if we have a shorter episode than normal, I think.
Yeah, sure. That's fine with me.
So, I guess the big things from the Xfinity race were, first off, the wreck with Ryan Sieg ending up in the air because Jeb Burton forgot where the brake pedal was. And then Landon Castle had a really great run that unfortunately turned out to be with an illegal car, which was disappointing.
Let's be thankful that he didn't win.
Yeah. Disappointing. I was really pulling for him. He's, I think, one of the best personalities in the sport. Yeah, it is what it is, and I'm glad he didn't win that way, even if he himself didn't do anything wrong there. I also thought Sheldon Creed had probably his best race of the year, and I was impressed with him. So I think he's been starting to show improvement throughout the year, just hasn't been getting the finishes, and if he can now string some runs like that together, I think he can kind of revitalize his stock in a way.
Yeah, you were just saying, I had it on the tip of my tongue and then I forgot. I was past Adam, I guess.
Yeah, and also quick shout out to Brandon Brown. Unironically, let's go Brandon in third. I was really kind of hoping he would run those guys down at the end.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. And Jeremy Clements in fourth.
Yeah. Do you remember what you were gonna say, Jake?
I don't think so.
Okay, we can edit this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to say about this weekend. I think it was, a solid but unspectacular weekend of racing. I have no idea what to expect at Pocono. I think that, it's so different than other large tracks that, I don't think we can say that the intermediate success of the Gen 7 will translate to Pocono, but I also don't think that the flat track failures of the Gen 7 will translate to Pocono. So I think it's going to be a unique race, and I really don't have a good feel for who's going to be good, who's not. And biggest thing I'm happy about is they moved it back to 400 miles.
Yep.
Which is, damn straight. I mean, I wish it was 500, but 400 is great.
Yeah, it'll all depend, just kind of like this week, on how wide the groove is, or if we get multiple grooves or whatever. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. It's kind of like Martinsville in that respect. I think what they really need to do is bring back the old grip strip. And no, I don't mean the PJ1 bullcrap. I mean the old grip strip that they had at the end of the 2000s. Those were some of the best Pocono races that we ever had in the modern era. Like, post like 90s or radial tires that we had. We'll just have to wait and see on that. Like, I'm actually in kind of a minority of people that I thought the best Pocono races overall were the ones from 2004 through 2010 where there was no shifting, which, it's not the same as the thing as this car with the shifting. Like we've noted, like the problems that it's potentially caused on some racetracks and with the kind of the bailout that it gives guys. But it was a different kind of thing with it back then. I don't know exactly why it was that way, but it seemed like just the action was better when they weren't shifting. And then it kind of got worse, in my opinion, after they went back to it in 2011. And Pocono has not been a good track recently, to say the least. Like the only race of the later Gen 6 era that I can remember that was really good was the first race last year. And even that was kind of propped up by, some strategy stuff, if I remember correctly. But some of the races there have been pretty dreadful. So in that respect, I guess this is a weekend to look forward to because it can't really get much worse than it has been. But I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic or optimistic about it. It's just all going to depend on how the track rubbers in and how many grooves we get.
I will say I have
Yeah.
I have a soft spot for a lot of those mid 2010s races at Pocono. Thought the second 2014 race there was really good. Obviously, I'm biased because Dale Jr. won, but it was. I remember that being a great race. I remember both 2016 races there being pretty good. The Chris Buescher Fog race, I thought that one was great up until it ended. What we actually got of it, probably because of the sense of urgency that a lot of drivers had. There was some battle at some point between Larson and Austin Dillon, who had both never won at the time, battling for the lead, and then there it was just. I remember a lot of those races being really good up until I guess 2017 is when they kind of started falling off again. Yeah, as far as this weekend, I kind of like Jake. I don't know what to expect. I guess probably best case scenario, it'll be kind of like what it was in the mid 2010s. The strategy will always mix things up there also, and the restarts are always exciting. Worst case, I guess we get just a bigger version of races we've had like Gateway. But, I try to be a glass half full person, and I think we should have positives to take away from it at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they went to one race a year at Pocono. I think that's perfect. I think it's a track that definitely deserves to be on the schedule, but I don't think it needs 2 dates. And frankly, it hasn't needed 2 dates for the last decade or so. And so I think just having one race makes it more special. And I mean, I definitely look forward to Loudon more than I did when I had 2 races, and I think the same is now true with Pocono. So yeah, I don't know what to expect either. Um, and I can't decide if I'm looking, if I'm hoping for it to go green and be a strategy long run type of race, or would I rather have a bunch of cautions and a bunch of restarts? I don't even know what I want from this race, so we'll just have to let it play out.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add on that note, I was just thinking about one thing that hurt Pocono in recent years. It was kind of similar to what's been happening with road course events, in that stages have kind of limited the amount of strategy play. I mean, it still happens, but it's kind of limited the amount of strategy that can be played where, just like it used to be at road courses, you had almost countless different strategies that you could use to just play the race out backwards, especially after they went to 400 miles and shorter races. But you're pretty much locked into having just 2 strategies now. Like, you either can stay out and get stage points, or come in and try to get track position that way, and then that's pretty much the way it is every stage. Like, they need to. I mean, I'm not against obviously having the stages on ovals, but they need to look at, in my opinion, the lap counts and like making them more kind of spread out or more kind of unpredictable is not the right word, but a little bit less streamlined to where it creates more situations where the teams can get creative and play the strategy game, because that's hurt this track, in my opinion, almost as much as it has the road courses. And also, I hate to bring it up, but and be like another one of our guys from the server that obsesses over it, but let's not kid ourselves. This is Pocono, which means rain's probably going to be part of the story. So let's just hope for the best on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of the stage length, I almost wonder if it would be cool if they had a stage length that was basically the same as the fuel window. Like, I think it's about 35 laps, like to force teams to either choose to try to stretch fuel from the beginning or, go all out and have a pit stop in the middle. That might be interesting,
That's
though
basically
maybe.
actually what they did at Loudon this week.
Not quite, but
Well, something like that. But yeah, I
yeah.
know what you're saying.
But yeah, because I think last year it was 50, 50, and 40 were the stage lengths. So they were all kind of the same. And, it just didn't lead. I mean, now we did end up having a fuel mileage finish in one of the races, but that was just dumb luck the way the caution fell. So, yeah, I mean, I would not mind seeing fuel mileage come into play this weekend. I'm usually not a fan of that, but that's kind of what Pocono is known for. So I'd be okay with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just all depends on the racing quality for me. Like, I'm not like against having fuel mileage race if it's already a crap event and it needs something to spice it up. Although it also kind of irks me sometimes when we get like undeserved winners, depending on how it affects the chase. But that's you're always going to be in a lottery when it comes to that. So I mean, what are you going to do?
I guess as far as my pick to win, I'll just go right into it. But because his season has made absolutely no sense this year, he has like 5 top 10s right now and is at second in laps led. I will go with William Byron. He's always run well at Pocono, it seems like. I think he could have won. He had the best car in the second race there last year, but ran out of fuel. So I don't know. It just seems like the type of race where he would come out firing on all cylinders and dominate and lead a bunch of, for whatever reason.
Yeah, in our little fantasy game in the chat, I picked Blaney this week. I don't really have a good reason for that, other than, I mean, Blaney's been pretty good at Pocono over the years, and I think he'd do for a win. And I've fallen back too many times this year on picking Larson because he dominated at the same race last year. But this is just a completely different year with a different car. Larson's nowhere near level he was, so I'm not gonna fall back on that again.
Yeah, for me, I'm just gonna keep picking Truex. I think it's until he actually does it, because I've been picking him like almost every week recently, like in the chat. Even if I've said otherwise in the podcast, like after I think about it and like put down my official like thing in the chat, I'll usually pick him. And I picked him at Loud, and it was looking really good for a couple stages before it fell apart. But I just think he's kind of driving with a renewed, for him, like his definition of the word fire, which is different from a lot of people, but he's driving with more passion and vigor ever since I think he got the contract situation out of the way, and I think he's kind of got something to prove. Like he got sick of people talking about him, like he's about to be out to pasture or whatever, and I think he's really motivated by that. And I think likewise he'll be motivated by what just happened, because you could tell he was clearly very, very unhappy about the result. That's as much as you're ever going to see out of him. So, yeah, I'm going to pick him for that, to bank off of what you said, I would love for a Kyle Larson win to happen, and there's a slightly better chance of it now that he's finally out of purgatory after his pit crew left a wheel off at Sonoma, which, as we all know, is the unforgivable sin these days in NASCAR. But I still can't pick him to win, but he's got a better chance than he probably has had in a while, and we'll just have to wait and see on that. But the Truex is my tentative pick.
I noticed somebody picked him in our fantasy game this week, and I kind of want to say that a dark horse I'm looking at this weekend is Daniel Suarez. It's just he's always been really good at Pocono. I think his best race with Gibbs he ever had was there in 2018, and so with him being this fast this year on a lot of these types of tracks, I think he could be somebody to really watch out for. And just in general, I think it seems like the type of race where Hendrick is going to be really fast, probably Trackhouse, and then see who else shows up.
For me, I don't really have any kind of thoughts or like prediction of what teams I think or whatever will be fast, because this is pretty much all new we're having this week, and so I can't, like, it's already been pretty fluid from week to week anyways, between like really who's fastest and what make and what team is doing well. So I can't offer any kind of insight on that, but I'm just kind of going off of a gut feeling there. But it could be completely different than what we've been saying, or it could be the same or whatever. But
fair enough. I mean, I absolutely was not expecting to see Chase have that kind of speed at New Hampshire, a track where he's never really, he or anybody at Hendrick has really done much in the last couple of years. So it does seem like, though, Pocono is always a good, even during those couple of seasons where Hendrick was trash, they would always find a way to run well there. And then it seems like the Fords kind of struggle there, I guess. Maybe aside from Harvick having some good runs, but even then he never won there, I think, until 2020. So yeah, I'm kind of expecting it to be a Chevy-Toyota fest.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. One last thing I wanted to add before maybe I ask you guys about something is I would recommend it for anybody that hasn't. If you're on Twitter, or it might be on YouTube, I haven't checked. Is check out the ending to that modified race on Saturday at Loudon. It was crazy. Anybody that I've been somebody, of course, that has seen my fair share of races at Bowman Gray, modified races there, and I've seen them at some other tracks like Caraway, Speedway, and Hickory, where they used to have the Busch races in the 90s. Modified races, when they can have them on bigger tracks where there's actually room to do stuff, are amazing. And on tracks like Loudon, I think that's pretty much considered like their Daytona 500, the ultimate event that they have on the tour every year. It always draws the most amount of cars, and it's got the biggest purse and whatnot. And they basically, it's like almost a mini DW12 style IndyCar race where they pretty much are drafting on the straightaways, and they obviously, because they're not fendered, they make a lot more downforce than like the Cup and Xfinity cars do. They're really nimble, and they can move around a lot faster and a lot easier than they can. And that really makes for some interesting action. Like, the leader can't really get away from anybody, and everyone kind of stays in a compacted line. And the end of that race, like, I won't spoil it, exactly what happened, but just check it out, people. It's well worth seeing. It was insane. But that, I think, is all I really have to offer. Anything else you guys wanted to add before we head off?
I got nothing else.
Nope.
Well, that sounds good then. So, thank all you guys for tuning in today. for this episode. Sorry that we're only able to be on Spotify right now. We're just, in an interim period here where we're going through some technical things. The show will be back on YouTube next month probably, and next month we probably will put all the episodes that we have had here retroactively on it, because we keep the tracks after we record them. Like we don't throw them away. They're still here, but we just can't upload to YouTube for the time being. But again, we appreciate your support. The TRC podcast is Ryan, our head analyst, Adam, our co-head analyst, and me, the guy that pretends to be an analyst but really isn't and just gives his feelings on the races, as well as being the host / moderator and the temporary tech guy. And also, like last week, I want to once again thank Ferris, aka RaceFan76, for doing backup recording for the show. If it had not been for him, we would not have been able to have a show last week, because I did a horrible job of trying to do the tech last week, and he pretty much saved our butts. And he's the reason we were able to have an episode at all last week. So, Ferris, thank you once again. Thank all of you for listening, and we'll see you next time.